It's Adrienne Lawrence once again, and this time I am joined by the director of Incorruptible Mass. That's Anna Callahan. Thanks for joining us, Anna.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be back.
Yes, it's so good to have you. It seems like it's been a while. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I mean, I was on the show in 2018, and back then, just to remind people, we were talking about a strategy, a very powerful strategy that I learned in Richmond, California, and that I've really gone around the country helping people, sort of guiding people in using this strategy to flip the balance of power at their city council, to use this strategy, you want to put together a broad coalition, including marginalized communities and progressive groups, run a slate of candidates on a solidarity platform. You really focus on a single electoral body and you support folks. The elected officials, you got to give them a lot of support after the election is over. We had a great chat about that a couple of years ago. And what we're doing now is really built on that kind of solid basis.
All right, and is that what you just described? Is that the Incorruptible Strategy?
It sure is, yeah. I worked with the folks from Richmond, California, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, Gail McLaughlin, and the wonderful folks there. And we put together a series of workshops, and I've traveled all over the country helping people with that.
That is very cool. And what made you all choose the name Incorruptible?
It was because I, at the time, was a big Bernie fan, and I felt like the difference between Bernie and a lot of the other candidates was that he had not changed, that he had really remained the same person that he was before his 35 years in office. And in fact, that's actually a guiding principle for us, is the idea that once people are elected, that they tend to move in one direction, away from the policies that the vast majority of Americans want and toward the demands of the powerful few. So to be incorruptible means that you really don't follow that pathway and that you remain true to your values.
Yeah, and that was something that I remember when I saw the first chapter in your book, Fixing the Crisis in American Democracy, as you had talked about kind of that gravitational pull where people in politics end up moving away. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, I'd love to. So this is really what makes our strategy so successful. It's that we recognize something that happens in politics that normally our progressive electoral focus and our progressive electoral playbook, we don't really think about it. And that's kind of this last step. So last time I was here, I said, here's what people usually do. They get progressives together, they wait for people to announce they're running, they pick the least bad ones, they help them get elected. And then the fifth step that often people laugh when I say it is, after people are elected, when you've elected people and they start doing things you don't like, get angry. So what we do, and the reason that our strategy is the way that it is because it recognizes this problem, and everything in the strategy is designed to solve that problem. It's designed to keep people from moving in that direction, to keep them on our side, and to really turn them into progressive champions.
Mm-hmm. Wow, and the thing is, we've seen a lot of people who seem to come into politics with more of a progressive edge or kind of a more democratic edge, and then they get sold out to the other side. Something that I remember in your book that kind of hit me was this whole Sinema Syndrome.
I'm glad that stuck with you. We call it Sinema Syndrome after Kyrsten Sinema, and that means when you start off as somebody really great. Kyrsten Sinema, if you remember, if your listeners remember, she was a Green Party candidate. She was anti-capitalism. She was anti-war. She was for every progressive policy in in Warren's platform, in Bernie's platform. And look at her now. She's essentially a Republican. She is, preventing voting rights from moving through. She's like almost single-handedly stopping all of our policies from being able to pass.
Yeah, it's quite embarrassing as well as disappointing. It seems like she got a taste of that money, and all of a sudden, which is unfortunate. And so, and she is definitely seemed to be corruptible. So, if you were kind of approaching that from the Incorruptible Strategy, I guess, is there a certain point where you would have gotten in there to prevent this?
So this is where when you look at our strategy, it might seem complicated. Oh, you gotta have a coalition, you gotta run a slate, you gotta support people after they're elected, which has a number of different moving parts. But really, everything is designed around that guiding principle. The principle of helping people who enter this, what I call the horrible poisonous swamp we call a political system, helping people to really remain true to their roots. And the truth is, it's just about, it's about being their tribe. So if we leave them alone, if we walk away after the election is over, then the only people that they end up feeling like they have, that are their colleagues, right, are the people that are in that political office with them. So we need to sort of be the people who are there for them. And that's where the support after the election, running a slate of candidates helps because they feel like they're on a team with each other, but providing that support after the election, providing support with constituent services, providing support with helping through, reading through policies, having some legal help who can really help them to make sure they don't get caught up in technicalities when their bills are entered. So those kinds of supports for them to help them do really their daily job.
Yeah, and I'm sure because I would imagine it might get rather overwhelming. And also with seeing someone who is new in office and somewhat of in a vulnerable position, I would assume that if the good doesn't get them, the bad will.
That's
and
right.
Speaking, yeah, for real, and speaking of somebody bad, although I think they were bad coming into politics, in the book you talk about the crisis not starting with Donald Trump. You say he's a syndrome of a democracy in decline that has been going on for decades. Yes. I guess help me break that down some.
So again, I think people make this democracy in crisis fairly complicated and talk about a lot of different issues that led to it. And I think we break it down as being something very simple. And that simple thing is that it's about power. Right now, the American people do not have the power to make our government do what we want. And you can look at things like, background checks on guns, which has like over 90% approval, and decades and decades and decades pass. We have protest after protest, and we cannot pass those policies. Climate change, you get abortion, all sorts of things that really, even Medicare for all, that the American people want, and we can't get those passed because the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the fossil fuel industry, and these other industries, they do have that power. So it's a question of power. And that's where I want to talk for a moment about democracy. And I love that you have asked this question because I have seen in cities, democracy be revitalized. And I can talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the people who normally don't vote start to vote. People, because their doors are being knocked on, they're being, accessed and encouraged. People who already vote start voting in also the city election, the state elections, primaries. People who vote they start becoming active in issue movements. They become activists. Activists become a team of people that are actively working with their progressive elected officials to co-govern, to actually strategize on passing policy. And what that allows is the progressive elected officials can then come right back around to the people who are least involved, and they can engage those people because that's something that really the elected officials are uniquely positioned to do. And by providing them with support, we give them the time that they can in fact do that to engage marginalized voices in the political process. And it is so beautiful to see. And I'm excited to be doing that in Massachusetts with our organization Incorruptible Mass, where we are running a slate of candidates for the Massachusetts State House.
That sounds like a very powerful thing and so incredibly important in that it needs to be done, especially because it seems like a lot of people are either fed up with the system or they're willing to go against their own interest. And something you had also noted in your book that really stood out to me was a quote by Michael Moore about Donald Trump supporters view him as a human Molotov cocktail they can throw into a political system that has left them behind.
Inequality before COVID was higher than it had been at any point since 1929. And we all know what happened in the 30s, right? In Europe, in the 30s, they ended up with a Mussolini and a Hitler. And we, fortunately, ended up with an FDR. When inequality gets incredibly high, you get change, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get good change. And I will say during COVID, we've had a skyrocketing of inequality and things cannot continue. So the decades-long crisis in democracy is that the American people cannot make their government serve them. They can't. And that's what's been going on for a long time and what I genuinely believe in my heart that this strategy can solve.
Yes, and we need something, that is for sure, because especially with Trump knocking on that door for 2024, it could be a very scary thing if the American people go ahead and answer it. And I know that you all are working very hard at Incorruptible Mass to get the right progressive faces out there and to provide them with the proper support so they don't end up with that whole Sinema Syndrome. But in terms of your next steps, you talked about work you're doing in Mass.
Yeah, so I know that you have a national audience, and I want to just make a little case for why it's important to work in blue states. Republicans know exactly how to get their horrible regressive policies passed. They go to deep red states, they take over the state legislature, and they pass policy that they can then cookie cutter to other states, and it invigorates their base. We need to do the same thing. We need to go to deep blue states, pass the policies that our people want, and then use that to take those policies to other states. That's the way that we're gonna get policy passed nationally. And that's why I'm doing this work in Massachusetts, which I think is a great example of a place to be working in.
Excellent, and can you please tell the viewers where they can find more information about Incorruptible Mass?
Yep, so it is incorruptiblemass.org. You can also you can download the first chapter of my book straight from that website. And you can support us there as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Anna Callahan, director of Incorruptible Mass, also the author of Incorruptible, Fixing the Crisis in American Democracy. Definitely head on over to her website, support, download, do all you need to do to uplift as we need more progressive voices in the game. Thank you so much for joining us, Anna. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to be here.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.